Welcome everyone to the first panel discussion of InventionCon 23. Today, you will be able to hear personal stories of inventors who took their products to market. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you very much to our panelists. My name is Carlos Gutierrez. I'm an Innovation Outreach Specialist for National Programs. We have some really inspiring innovators that you'll be hearing from today, so let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to go ahead and start by introducing Leanna Golden Gant, founder and CEO of TookTake. Next, we have Shalisa McNeil Burgess, founder and CEO of Freya Jewelry. And third, we have Daria Walsh, inventor and founder of Infinity Clips. Thank you all very much again for joining us. Let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first thing I'd like to do is have you all introduce yourself, your company, your invention, and share what type of intellectual property that you have. We'll go ahead and start with Leanna. Go ahead and take it away, Leanna.
Hi, I'm the founder of TookTake Dosage Reminder Labels, and I'm also the inventor of it. And I have a utility patent and a trademark for TookTake.
Excellent, thank you. Shalisa?
Hi, my name is Shalisa McNeil Burgess, and I am the founder and CEO of Freya Jewelry. We incorporate cooling technology into fashion jewelry. I have both a utility patent and a trademark.
Excellent, thank you. Daria?
Hi, I'm Daria Walsh. I'm the inventor and founder of Infinity Clips. Infinity Clips is basically the first necklace shortener made for thin chains, and it's a little clip. Looks like this, and it attaches to the back of your necklace, and it allows you to adjust the length of your necklace to go with any outfit. I received a utility patent for my invention in March of 2022, and I also have a trademark.
Excellent, very exciting, very exciting. So first thing we want to hear from you all on is, what does your intellectual property mean to you? And we'll go ahead and start with you, Daria.
Okay. Well, my utility patent to me is really a symbol of my journey as an inventor. It's the foundation that I built my whole company on and my brand upon. It's offered me protections when selling online in places like Amazon, and it also helps me stand out as a unique solution in the marketplace.
Excellent, those are great points. Shalisa, you want to take it up next?
Sure. The journey to get to having IP protection was definitely what I would call a perilous one. But for me, my patent meant that I succeeded in this journey. I honestly didn't even give myself credit for any of the work that we accomplished until that patent was issued. It just signified, as far as me and the team were concerned, that we actually created something that was innovative, that had value, and that we would be able to build upon on a foundation that it was worthy of protection.
Excellent, excellent, great overview. Leanna?
I agree with the same reasons that Daria and Shalisa said, and I think in my case too, because TookTake, I didn't show up before, but it's a really simple label system. So I think people think it's so simple that it would be easy to copy, and it's not, but I also feel good that I have protection on it, and I invented something, and there was a different scene in my invention to what was out there. So it just gave me credibility, and it's helped me get a lot further with my product than I think I would have otherwise, because that's usually the first question I get asked is, do you have a patent?
Sure, and that's a great overview as well. I do want to say, I think Shalisa had mentioned the journey there, right? So I think next we'd like to hear from you about a particular part about your journey, usually looking at it from the context of problem solution, right? So along your way, how did you identify the problem that you wanted to solve, and what was that journey like creating the solution? Shalisa, let's go ahead and start with you.
Well, it's so interesting. People often ask me that, and I say I literally woke up one day with the idea of cooling jewels in mind, and I didn't know at the time what it was going to become. I wasn't a scientist at the time. I was not an engineer, neither a jewelry designer, but the problem that I was addressing was the misery of hot flashes due to menopause. And my research up until that point let me know that there were limited options in this space for this life stage that would address it without having some kind of negative impact on our biology. It makes a normal organic occurrence in the lives of women born female. And we just had so few options. And I thought we deserved a way that allowed us to maintain our dignity and, be discreet and just not draw attention to ourselves because it's such a negative narrative. I mean, now people are talking about it more, but over these last 6-7 years, it was not. It was still very taboo. So my journey started there. Like, how do I address it? Because, you're not going to solve menopause, but I could address the discomfort in a way that was honorable to those who were experiencing it and also add the value of education and community. So that's where we started. And I started with nothing. Like I said, I started with 2 words. So my journey was really from 0 to 100. I had to do so much research and talking to people and gaining knowledge and education and traveling around the world. I literally went to India to meet a guy who's actually what we would call one of our competitors, to see if, that might be an option to use his technology with my idea. But it didn't work out that way. So we were able to create a new technology using an existing one that was already in the public domain, but a new use. So that's why we got our utility patent. And now we call it a beautiful way to beat the heat. And we think that it really is going to go and take off. But it has definitely been challenging. It took about 4 years to get the patent issued. And so it was a lot of work.
Excellent. So it was very personal for you, because I think that's the case for most innovators. It's something that they have as part of their lives, and then they figure that they're going to go ahead and try to solve that problem.
Very personal, but then also widespread. Once I started talking to people, I realized it was millions and millions and millions of us having the same problem, and the same problem with limited options. So yes, it started out personal, but it definitely was meant to be beneficial to the masses.
Excellent. Thank you. Great overview. And let's go over to you, Leanna. Let's hear from you. What inspired you, or what problem you identified?
Yeah, mine was also a really personal solution at first. I was in treatment for breast cancer, and during my chemotherapy treatment, I had dozens of medications to keep track of, and they were all in different forms. A lot of them weren't pills, and they were also all on different schedules. And it became increasingly more stressful for myself and my family to keep track of the medications. And since I was taking a lot of medications, I wanted something really simple that I felt like I could keep track of. So I started to make little labels for myself, first just using sticky notes and tape and different things, and just sticking it on the different things. And over the year of my treatment, my husband and I, because we both have a design background, just started to play with it, because it gave us something kind of to do together, since I couldn't do a whole lot. So we played with different ways we could make the labels look and make them more fun. And by the end of my treatment, we had these really neat looking labels with little perforated tabs we could pull off, and they were super easy to use. We'd even used them for our dog when she had an ear infection, so she didn't get her medication too often. And then when I was done with treatment, I was like, okay, that was fun. And I kind of put it away for a little. Like, I sort of thought about making a business, but then I thought, I don't know. But then I had one medication I had to take every day, and I just couldn't remember to do it. And it was supposed to be keeping my cancer away. So it was making me more and more stressed that I couldn't keep track of it. So I took my little labels out again, and I was like, hey, if I need this, I'm sure a lot of other people do too. So I started talking to friends and talking to other people, and found out there's almost everyone I know takes something, whether it's a vitamin or they have a daily medication for some chronic condition or allergies, or there's some face wash they're supposed to use from their dermatologist, or something that they're supposed to use. And they had just kind of given in to the fact that they were just going to forget sometimes, or not know if they did it, so they would skip it. So I started giving out my labels and having people try it, and they loved them, and they said it really helped them, and they liked that it didn't make them feel like they were suddenly 900 years old because they couldn't remember their medicine. It was just a super fun, easy way for them to keep track of it and keep everything in its containers. So that was my journey. My patent, actually, I've heard it's really an anomaly. Mine took less than a year to get through. So
that's
I
pretty
did
good.
have help though. So, but
There you go.
yeah, it was a great experience, and I'm happy I did it.
That's I'm glad you mentioned that. That's one of the questions we're going to follow up with here, but we'll wait on that one. I want to hear from Daria, but I did want to say it sounds like your innovation and Shalisa's innovation both have really broad worldwide applications, right? Like lots of people can use these for multiple different types of things. So I think that's really fantastic. Daria, go ahead, take it away. Let's hear from you.
I guess my journey began because it was, I needed it. I needed the solution. I remember at the time I was wearing the same long necklace. I fell in love with this one necklace and I was wearing it every day, but it wasn't always working with certain outfits. It would either be too long or it gets stuck in my shirt, and it doesn't work. And so I was trying to find a solution to shorten it so I could wear it every day and have it look good at the same time. And I was surprised I couldn't find any solutions on the market. At the time, most of the solutions were like permanent shortening by a jeweler or buying multiple chains and switching out the pendant. And then there was, the homemade hacks like Scotch tape that people would put on the back, and it just looked awful. I'm like, I know I could do better. I know there's a better solution out there. So that's kind of where, the journey began for me, and the Infinity Clips was born.
Excellent, excellent. That kind of leads into the next question I have. As you all were going down your journeys of innovation, what challenges did you experience, either with the intellectual property processing part of it, or with the commercialization of it, or with partnerships? I know, Shalisa, you had mentioned, well, you looked at a potential partner in India, and then you had to pivot, and then you looked at a current solution that was already being used in the market, and you kind of utilized that, but changed it up a little bit. So I want to hear from everybody about the challenges that you faced and how you overcame those challenges. And let's switch it up and let's start with Leanna. Go ahead, Leanna.
Well, I launched TookTake about 6 months before COVID hit. So my original plan was that it needs to be in all the pharmacies and vitamin stores, wherever people get their wellness products. And when COVID hit, everything closed down. So we had to pivot really quick and decide we weren't going to retail because they weren't buying and everything was closed. So we really quickly had to switch to consumer facing. We already had a website, but it wasn't ideal for direct to consumer. So we had to build a new website really fast and get on Amazon, because that was really the only way for a small business to keep, getting distribution at that point. So that was our big pivot. After COVID, we were able to get back in retail. We're in CVS and Walmart and pharmacies. But yeah, that was a big change to our plans really quickly, like right out of the gate.
Sure. That was actually, I was going to ask you if you eventually did get back into the stores. So I'm glad to hear that you did. But it's also nice to hear that with all those things going on, you still found a way to get into the market somehow on your own, and then move things forward, and then later on building it out to the more robust plan that you had initially envisioned. Daria, how about you? Challenges, pivots?
Oh, so many challenges. I actually didn't pivot. I think that for me, my journey's been more of a zigzag, trying to see what works, what doesn't work. I've had basically the same overall strategy from the beginning. My biggest challenge, and I think where you could say that, I had to pivot the most, was initially when I had started out, I was making my clips by hand because I launched on Etsy. And because of that, I realized I couldn't scale unless I got, some solid manufacturing in place. I was selling out. I couldn't keep up. So that was one of the biggest challenges on my journey. I also did not have a lot of money when I started. I started my entire business with about $500. So that was, a huge challenge starting out and trying to be resourceful and creative in trying to figure out how to bring this product to market in the most effective, cost-effective way to have it become a success. And and that's kind of been the biggest challenges so far for me.
I think that's a great story, and it's important to get that information out there, because I think there's a notion sometimes that it takes this vast sum of money to get started, and I think it's really beneficial for folks to hear from innovators like yourself that they've started with very, very little upfront, but still were able to build something out that's very valuable and then it has a lot of applications.
Yes, and I'd love to get into that more if we're going to go, or I could talk about it now.
Oh, sure. We'll get into it in just a second,
Okay,
but let's hear
great.
from Shalisa. I know you had talked about the opportunity to partner with somebody in India. If you want to expand on that, or even talk about some of the other challenges that you had to overcome as well, and then we can get right back around to Daria's point there and talk a little bit more about her plans and her process. Go ahead, Shalisa.
Well, I think that we started, when you start with a lot of what I call like not knowledge, right? You can call it ignorance, but there was so much knowledge that I did not have. I just knew that there was a huge pain point. It wasn't being addressed. I believe that, women would really love like a really beautiful piece of jewelry that had double duty, but I didn't have anything. So part of the challenges or the trial was like figuring out what to create, even though it has immense value. Interestingly for us, like before we had product, technology, or anything, we knew we had to get a patent. So we actually started talking to the patent lawyer before we had the innovation itself. And people be like, well, how did that work? Because we wanted to get guidance on how to move forward with that in mind. We knew it was going to be different, and we knew it was going to be game changing. And even if we didn't know what it was going to be, we knew it would require some kind of protection in terms of like the intellectual property itself. So when I say we traveled all over the place, we traveled all over the place. We talked to anybody and everybody who had engineering knowledge, science knowledge, biology knowledge. Like we just were in a constant state of like gather information. Okay, how do we take this information and move the needle forward? And just like my two counterparts here, like when I tell you we had nothing, like I had no money. And when people go, how did you manage to bring this to fruition? So, I bootstrap so much of it, just like I'll empty my any account I have, retirement, everything else, because I just wanted to bring it forward, and I wanted to, and the passion was so driving. So we went to India. It didn't work out with that guy, and it was okay, but we learned a lot from the process, right? We learned that he validated what we wanted to do just by what he had already created, right? We were just going to do the same thing in a different way. We didn't even know it was going to be in a different way when we met. We just knew that his technology wasn't going to work for what we wanted to do. So we kept the process going until we met like the engineering team at the University of Illinois. And they were doing heat thermal research transfer. And we were like, we need to do something in a nano capacity so that we can integrate it into something pretty and dainty. And they was like, yeah, let's do it. It was just like that. Like, yeah, let's do it. Let's try it. Let's see what we can create. And we just kept playing with it until we did. And it was like amazing, because it was like, this is hydropower. This is water power. Like it only requires water. How is it going to be technology? So the process of learning was humongous for us. And then in terms of pivots, when you don't know which direction you're going, you're constantly pivoting, right? Because you're trying to see what works. And then you eliminate, the process of elimination just naturally occurs. Like, oh, that's not going to work. Oh, that's not going to work. But when we got to this technology, to evaporative cooling, we learned that it was used industrially primarily, right? And to cool turbines and wind tunnels. And I was like, yeah, but it might work to cool people if we make it in a nano capacity. So that's what we worked on. It was an amazingly informative journey. It was like so cerebral, but at the end of the day, it's simple and complicated at the same time. And that just is wrought with any kind of problem you can imagine. And then getting people to take you seriously or to understand what you're doing. Because when you say nanothermal cooling technology, people go, oh my God, that sounds, like really scary. But I'm like, put a cold bottle on your wrist and it'll cool you down. Oh, that makes sense. Same concept in a pretty, delivery system. Then I have to make it simpler. But we were really taking something that wasn't well known and trying to make it so that the average person would get the concept. And that took a whole lot of work.
Sure. You know, I want to touch on something that you'd mentioned and that Daria had mentioned, and that has to do with that upfront financing, right? And also a little bit more, I want to talk about the IP. But before we get into the IP, you both had already brought it up, so we can just jump into that right now. So did you use any creative financing strategies? And I imagine that all three of you probably did, especially Daria mentioning that, you know, she didn't have very much upfront funding for it. And what did that consist of? You know, did you utilize a particular type of loan, or did you? I know, Shalisa, you mentioned bootstrapping and using the funds that you had available and 401k, I think you said, and I think that's pretty common. So let's go back over to you, Daria, because I know that was the subject that we had ended on when we last heard from you. Go ahead.
I think it's, you know, it's great to talk about this stuff, because I think when people start out and they have an idea and they don't even know where to start, they think they need so much money to get started. But we're inventors, we're creative, we're resourceful. We can figure this out, you know, step by step if we just, you know, put our minds to it and, you know, take it little by little, right? So when I first started, I said I only had like $500. So I had to be creative. And I made my own prototypes. I remember going through the aisles of hardware stores and craft stores, piecing things together. Probably did about 100 prototypes before I found one, which is surprising because I thought I had a simple product and it wasn't as simple as I thought, because there was a lot of trial and error. I wanted it to be able to fit a range of products, a range of chain styles and thicknesses. And, you know, there was a lot of misses, but I finally got something that was, you know, a prototype that I could bring to market. The way I was able to bootstrap my way through this and save money is I basically, after I had the prototype, I wrote my own provisional patent. And then, you know, for a micro entity, I think it's what, $70, $80 or something to file. So that was, you know, excellent, the initial starting point. And a provisional patent allowed me to test market my idea for a year to see if it had market potential before I started investing more money into it, which I think is really important. You know, before you start going down the process. So provisional patent to start. The way I figured out how to write it, having no money, is I watched YouTube videos. There was a college that posted, and I see everybody smiling because YouTube is amazing. There was a college that posted a video about how to write a provisional patent, and I probably read about everything I could get my hands on about how to write an effective one. So I started there. I launched on Etsy. And I was hand making, like I mentioned before, I was hand making most of my clips at the time. And it was great because launching on a marketplace, I was able to get feedback from customers while it was test marketing the product. And I was able to improve upon it and see, you know, how, you know, people were going to feel about this product and what I can improve on. And it really helped me improve the whole thing before going to manufacturing. You know, there's other ways to do it. People do surveys. This was just hit the ground running and see what it was. That was my most cost effective way, because I was also making money while it was test marketing. And the test market was a success, which actually paid for my non-provisional patent and my first round of manufacturing. So the whole process for me is just bootstrapping. I had a full-time job for, you know, the first couple of years, just kept rolling over profits. I was able to hire a lawyer to, you know, after the test market paid for it, to, you know, submit, you know, review my application, do the claims, which is the tricky part I didn't want to mess with. I wanted to make sure everything was in properly when the file was filed, and, you know, also help me through the final stages of, you know, getting the patent approved. But the whole process does not have to cost a fortune. You know, you could do it step by step, figure it out. One of the things I did for creative financing was at a certain point, I couldn't keep up with demand. I kept selling out and I needed to buy larger quantities. So I did use the no interest promotional credit cards in order to, you know, no interest for a year type thing. And I was able to purchase larger quantities of inventory and paid it off as sales came in. So, you know, just little by little, I kept rolling over stuff until I was able to kind of finally quit my job and go all in.
Well, that's a really great overview there, Daria. And I think you touched on so many things that I just wanted to highlight here, because it's so many things that I wanted to discuss. And I'm glad you started the conversation off on that. First, it's really interesting to hear about the 100 prototypes, because I think sometimes folks might get a little bit discouraged if you go through only a few and they say, well, it didn't really work out. But it's good for folks to hear from a successful innovator that, hey, it might not be 2, it might be 50 or 100 or 200. So I think that's really good information to pass along. Also, I'm glad you touched on the provisional patent and the extreme value of that. It really is a valuable tool, and it gives so much benefit to the innovators. So I think it's good for our attendees to hear. That's a great resource, and you definitely want to go to uspto.gov and learn more about it. And take Daria's advice and go ahead and maybe want to start looking at some videos to get you some context for what it's gonna involve. The next that I really like, and this is a subject that I think we could probably fill up a whole nother panel session, is the test marketing in the commercialization phase. And I think that once innovators move from the intellectual property and then moving something to the marketplace, sometimes that's a step that gets glossed over, right? And it's very important, when you're looking at the commercialization phase, to recognize what you're trying to do is provide what the customer wants and not what you think they want. And I think a lot of times, sometimes we as innovators think, oh, well, this is definitely what they want. But to your point, and it's just such a great point, the best way to find out what they want is doing exactly what you said and asking them, or using Etsy and getting that feedback through that platform. So basically, you're giving yourself a tool to receive that feedback. So it's just really, really terrific information to pass along. And we'll get more into the need for expanded inventory, because I think that's another one, right? Because when you look at supply chain, and I'm sure see everybody shaking their heads there, because early on you might have a little bit, and then you don't ever think, and I've had this with one of my innovations, you don't ever think that you're gonna fall into a situation where your biggest problem is, hey, I'm selling too much. But it's important for everybody to know that luckily, if you get to the right place, you will have those type of problems, and those are good problems to have. So let's go over to Leanna, and we can hear from you about your financing strategies. And Daria touched on a little bit there associated with the IP, and I want to expand on that some more as well. But let's also start with the finance strategies. What was your experience with that portion of it?
Yeah, I mean, we started with, very, very little money also, because I was, just coming out of cancer treatment, and surprisingly, that's super expensive. So yeah, I mean, luckily my product was relatively inexpensive to make, but we did the same thing, like hundreds of prototypes, getting people to try them, and then, putting them for sale on our own website, and having a few friends try them, and having them try and, tell other friends, so we could get feedback before we invested in a really large quantity. And that information was so valuable to have, because even though our first runs, being smaller, were a little more expensive, it was really valuable, because if we had just gone all in on a huge run and invested all that money, we wouldn't have been able to make changes. So even though it cost us a little bit more upfront, it was really important for us to be able to make little changes along the way as we got feedback, and keep improving the product, and the feedback got better and better. We used the no interest credit cards like Daria did also. And yeah, because I think a lot of people, you see the TV shows where people have raised millions of dollars, and people feel like that's the only way to do it. But being in a lot of groups with other female inventors and other founders, you find most things aren't that way. Those are sort of the highlights and the big fancy stories. But most people start out, with their savings or a credit card, or just, start out really simple and build slow. And I think it makes a stronger foundation. I did the provisional patent as well, which was also great, because it gave us not only the time to test the product out and really test the market and make sure there was an audience, but it also helped us spread costs out a little too, because we had the provisional patent. So it gave us time to, sell some product to get money for the utility patent later. So yeah, all these things really helped us be able to build slowly, but build a really strong foundation for the company.
Sure, and I think you touched on a couple of points that are similar to what Daria had mentioned. So I think that's really great for folks to hear that in some cases folks are using and utilizing the same types of tools out there. You know, you both have their provisional patents. You both went through those little pivots from one design to the next until you got the exact perfect design, and the no interest credit cards as well. I also think it's valuable to note that one of the benefits of that provisional patent is that it gives you time to raise that money that you're going to need maybe for the entire cost of the full patent. And also, great point on noting that, hey, you're also, if you're ready to start doing that, you're able to start selling some product as well. So that's a great point to be able to share. Let's hear from you, Shalisa. How about, what was your experience like with the financing portion?
Oh, wow. Well, I was determined to bring this to fruition. So I utilized any source I had. I worked multiple jobs. I was a full-time real estate broker in New York City. So I used my commissions, I used my 401k, I used my savings, I used my paycheck. And then on top of that, I started entering things like pitch contests and writing for grants. And so I was able to raise money that way as well. And it was helpful, like every dime, even if I only won $1,000, $2,500, $10,000, it didn't really matter, because every bit of that money was able to help us move that needle forward a little bit more. I did not go the provisional patent route. We went straight to the non-provisional for a bunch of reasons. But we had the benefit of having an amazing IP lawyer who was also an engineer, who's one of my advisors, and he helped us. He wrote that patent, and he knew exactly what to do and how to write it and how to make it as expansive as possible so that we would have room to grow in terms of using our technology for multiple other purposes. So we were very strategic in that. Also, because my resources were so limited, I didn't have the luxury of like, let's step with this provisional and then pay again to do the non-provisional. We spoke about it at length, and we was like, listen, we're just going to go straight for this non-provisional utility patent. There were obviously some things we had to, that were challenged that we had to work through. But once we got started, it was, like smooth sailing for the most part. And that's probably why my patent meant so much to me, because we worked so hard to get it. And it was like, this is the foundation. And it's really because, we weren't getting any institutional financing. We would talk to VCs and things like that, because an innovation like ours, everybody would say, oh my God, this is amazing, and still we wouldn't get any money. And then they would say things like, well, if you have some traction, or if you have secured your IP, you'd be much more marketable for us, or, more desirable. And then I would get each of those things and they would still say too early. And so I'm like, I got the patent, and I would go back and I'm like, hey, you guys said that once I get the patent, I would be in a better position to qualify for, some funding, so we can get some assistance in our scale and growth opportunities desire. And they would still say it's too early. So to this day, we still bootstrap. My ingenuity is being resourceful. So I tell people all the time, I know how to make $1 out of 15 cents. And that is true. We were able to stretch every dollar we got. That allowed us to, we have an amazing relationship with the jewelry company that designs and manufactures for us, which is Swarovski. And people are like, how did you get a relationship with Swarovski? Working hard. And my former co-founder already had that relationship. So and then like the other young lady said, it didn't make sense to throw yourself into debt in a humongous way, right? By trying to have a humongous market launch. So even now we consider ourselves like MVP validating. And even though we've gotten like a great number of sales thus far, we're still not in the black, but it gave us all the feedback that we need now to iterate to the level 2.0 of our innovation. And it also allows you to gain even more knowledge that increases your confidence. To me, as you step up, you get more confident as you learn more about your market and what they want. It wasn't, even if my idea was personal, that doesn't mean that the way I feel about it is the way the market feels about it. And so we just did a really small pilot, like we just put in a small order of units to sell to the market directly. Like, we're going to test the market on the market. And we of 1,000 units, we sold 600. And, then we gave away some, we did focus groups with some, but at the end of the day, the goal was like, use every bit of that feedback. So when we're iterating, we're going to come out with an even better product when we launch for real. And that also keeps you from the stress of being in debt. Now, having not enough financing also has its challenges, right? Because you don't have for us, we didn't have the luxury of having like a team. We don't have marketing dollars. We don't have like a CMO or anything that would really push the branding and marketing. But for us to have accomplished all that we did with like interns and consultants and those relationships that were built along the way, that was invaluable to also pour that knowledge and information that we gathered even before we started writing our patent to actually make it viable enough to be issued. So journeys, money and innovation and startup, all of that is like all in the same vein, like when you're talking to people. But I don't know anybody that it's easy for. It is challenging, and you have to be really, really resilient. You have to have really thick skin for all the no's, and you have to figure out a way to be like, I don't have much, but how can I use what I have to do what needs to be done? And I didn't really focus on what we didn't have. I just focused on what we did have and how we could be really, like I said, resourceful with what we had so that we would move the needle forward.
Sure. Wow, that's a lot of great points there as well. You all are touching on a lot of great things that I did want to highlight. So it looks like we're 3 for 3 in the iterations, right? And I think that's really, really great for folks to hear. All 3 of our innovators today had to go through a lot of iterations. So you don't want to get discouraged if you're not getting it on the first try. And I think it's great for them to know that part of success is probably going to have to involve going through all those iterations. I also like that you brought up a very key point associated with access to capital, and that's that institutional lenders, for the most part, don't lend to early stage innovation startups. And I think you all probably found that out yourselves when you were having your journeys. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other options, right? There aren't these other things, and you're leading into the next question that I did have for everyone, which is, I think Leanne mentioned that there's some groups of female innovators, right? And Shalisa talked about grants and pitch competitions. So all these organizations within the innovation ecosystem, right? So what partners in that innovation ecosystem did you utilize? Were there accelerators or some other types of partners? I mean, I would also like to hear an expansion on Shalisa's comments about the pitch competitions, because I think that's one of the ones that's really underutilized, and it's important to get folks that information. I know for a fact I've worked on ones where there's city and state and county pitch competitions. And Shalisa, you mentioned that I think one for $1,000. Is that correct? So yeah, it's important for folks to know, if you get into those little pitch competitions, it might be 500 or 1,000, or some of the larger ones with established larger accelerators, incubator, maybe 10 or 20,000. So we'll move on over and start with you, Leanna, and you can tell us a little bit more, expand maybe on the female innovator groups and any of these other partners that you might have utilized.
Yeah, I think there's so many resources out there, especially once you really start looking and talking to other people. So there's a lot of groups for inventors specifically, and people who have already gotten patents, people at all different levels. So it's really great because you can hear, people's experiences from every step of the way, and in different product categories too. And I think that's the same for pitch competitions. I've only done one. I think a lot of the pitch competitions, you really have to keep up on them and keep looking, because some of them are very specific for a tech product, or
For sure.
for female founders, or for diverse founders, or so it's finding the ones that fit with your product so you have a good chance of winning. I think those are also a great place when you find the right group to meet other people who are in your space who you can learn from, which is really valuable. I think some of my best entrepreneur friends I haven't met in person, but I talk to them all the time in different groups and different platforms, because I found that they're really a supportive group, because everyone's been through something. And even if it's something super simple, like I can't find packaging that's affordable, what did you do, or who did you talk to? Somebody will have a resource. So that's just a really great thing to do, even if you're just starting out, is find a community that you feel right in, find your people and talk to them. But then there's also a lot of great free resources, just like you said, in different communities. I worked with my local SBA office, and they were amazing. They have people to help with just about everything. But I was doing one applying for a fellowship program, and I needed a business plan, and I had applied to other ones in the past and didn't get in. And I felt like that was my weak link, was my business plan wasn't looking as professional or sounding as professional as it needed to be. They assigned someone to work with me. I talked to them once a week, and now I have a really strong business plan using the language and the wording in the presentation that the fellowship's expecting to see, not me just saying, here's my goals. So I think if you just each step of the way talk to the resources around you and look in your community, there's so many things that you can pay tens of thousands of dollars for, but you really don't have to, if you're willing to just take some time and look for the resources and talk to people. I mean, I talked to Daria in a group I'm in. It's like, hey, how'd you do that? Or, what are you doing? Or, even just, I'm having a really bad day. This isn't going right. Just to have someone go, yeah, that happens. It does. So keep going. You're good.
Right.
It's all super valuable.
That's great. That's great advice. And I'm glad you mentioned the business plan, because I just wanted to put that in context with the pitch competitions. Just so everyone knows, usually, especially for those pitch competitions, they do want you to have a business plan. So if you start looking into those, you're definitely going to want to look into the business plan first, because it's probably going to be one of the requirements. Over to you, Daria. Did you have any experience with any partners in the innovation ecosystem, or any groups that you were a part of, or any competitions?
I echo exactly what Anna said. And yes, we are in the same Women's Inventor group. I know her from
nice.
our group. And, for me, I did have a SCORE mentor. I love SCORE program. That was more for the business end of things as I was developing, and I'm still in contact with him as a mentor. I've had other mentors who have helped me along the way. SCORE is probably the only official avenue I've taken, because I'm very much I guess I'm introverted, but nobody believes that, because I'm kind of extroverted at the same time. I don't know what that is called, but I tend to kind of go in my hole and learn, because you either have time or money, and I didn't have money. So I had to have, spend my time learning. So YouTube University was great. I love YouTube. Inventors groups. There's so many people. And then, starting out, the pro bono program and stuff like that, there's so many resources available to inventors that, a Google search, would come up, and there's so many new companies popping up, that are helping inventors get out there. I think, independent inventors are really coming up. We want to be able to help people get there. And, people like us who are on here right now and sharing our story, because we've been there and people have helped us along the way, and we want to give back. So you could always find someone who's willing to help you. I definitely would join an inventors group and take advantage of all the resources that the patent office does offer.
Terrific. Yeah, that's really great advice. And I'm glad you mentioned the patent pro bono program. We're going to be hearing a little bit more about that in today's program. And you've all given such terrific advice. We're coming up on the end of it there. So I did want to give one more round to everybody and just ask additionally, I know you've given a lot, so just any additional advice you would give to someone just starting out, and maybe something associated, what they should expect that might not be something that you expected early on, right? Maybe what was one of the things that you found surprising, and how did you overcome with that? And we'll start here with Shalisa, and we'll go through one last time and have everybody give us your final advice remarks.
Well, the first thing I would say is operate with caution, because when you enter this ecosystem, everybody who is offering help is not necessarily offering help that might be to your benefit, and they always want you to pay for something. You'll start to get all kinds of offers for, advertising or marketing, and they'll be like, hey, we want to do a story on you. We want you to pay for that story. Hey, we want to, highlight your product. We want you to pay us for that. And so in the early days, I was so green that there was just a lot that I didn't know. And I was like, oh, I thought that these are the things I would have to do in order to gain visibility. But then when I realized that it didn't actually help or benefit me in any way, but it decreased what resources I had, I was like, I learned that lesson the hard way. And so you have to be mindful. Even when people say, hey, they was like, you should just jump on Amazon. Well, you need to go to Amazon University and understand what the ramifications are of that endeavor, because it's not just jumping on Amazon and selling. They have a lot of rules, regulations, and fees that if you're not prepared for them, you might actually get caught up and it could be detrimental to your business. The only other thing I want to add before we jump off is like, in terms of financing opportunities, I think that there are a lot of startups don't take advantage of government financing. And if they go and try to apply for SBIR, which is a Small Business Innovations Research Grant, we were just recently recommended for our grant. So now we're just waiting to see if we get our full funding.
That's a big accomplishment.
It's a huge accomplishment and it's a huge undertaking. It is not easy at all, but it does give you financing to continue to research your product that as you prepare for commercialization. And so many people don't really know about it. And I'm like, once we found out about it, I mean, like I said, it's an arduous process, but it is worth it if it allows you to have some additional support, and not just money, but other support resources that moves your needle forward, and the lift is not as heavy. So I just think that, be mindful of the offers you take, of the people who come to you and ask for things. If you don't know any better, it's easy to be taken advantage of. And then surround yourself with like advisors that you trust. That's my advice.
That's really excellent advice, Shalisa. And I think that it's important to be able to note that you want to be able to look out for those pitfalls, right? And also do your upfront research. I'm also really excited to hear about the SBIR program. I'm very involved in that program. We're going to have to invite you back and talk about that one. That's a whole nother hour on its own, I think, with that revelation there. So let's go ahead and go on over to Daria. How about you, Daria? Final recommendations, final advice?
Advice, I would just say, just go for it. I think that, I've been an inventor at heart since I think my first invention was like 8 years old. And over the years, I've always had these ideas, and I see them come out, other people bring them out to the marketplace, and I'm like, oh, I should have done that. Oh, I should have followed through with it, and I think a lot of inventors are like me, that, we have so many ideas, but we don't know where to start. And I think you just have to go for it. You just pick one of your ideas that you think that you could bring to market, that has market potential, that is easy to manufacture, or you believe is easy to manufacture. Nothing's ever easy, but just try. And you're not going to know what you're doing on day one. You're going to figure it out as you go. So don't let that stop you, that you don't know where to start. Just go, just start. And little by little, you're going to learn, and you're going to grow into the person you need to become in order to be an inventor and be an entrepreneur that brings your product out to the world. And that's it.
Excellent advice. Excellent. I really like that. Just go ahead and jump in. You're never gonna find out until you get in there and start working on it.
Exactly.
Leanna, over to you.
Yeah, I agree with what they both said. And I also think jump in. And then I think the main thing is go slow. I think go deep, go slow, learn each step, so that you build a really strong foundation for your product. I know one of my really good friends had a business before me, and she said, it takes 7 or 8 years to become an overnight success. I think we all get, watching these pitch contests and Shark Tank and stuff, people think it happens overnight. And then when you really read about a lot of these companies, these people have been doing it 5, 10, 15 years before anybody heard of them.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think it makes people think you're failing right out of the gate when you've been selling for a month and nobody's offering you millions of dollars for your product. And that's just
Sure.
really not how it works. But
Sure.
so, you know,
I really
don't
like
beat
that
yourself
advice.
up.
I think it's really good to reiterate and highlight. You don't need to speed off and do it really fast.
No, that rarely works out well from my experience. So
Sure.
I think, yeah, just believe in your product, take the time to learn, and it'll become a really strong product and you'll get the attention that you're looking for. But it's not going to happen for most people day one.
Excellent advice. Well, we're at the end of our session. I think this was a fabulous session. I really want to thank you all very much for your insights and being here with us.